All right, welcome to this week's discussion for the BEMA Podcast. We are the Lubbock group at the Lubbock Mission Church. This week, they discussed most of chapter 24 and most of chapter 26, I would say most of. So let's get started in Genesis chapter 24, verse 1. Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac." The servant asked him, "What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from?" "Make sure that you do not take my son back there," Abraham said. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, 'To your offspring I will give this land,' he will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there." So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore on oath to him concerning this matter. One of the first things that Brent brought up was that this relationship was reminiscent of Pharaoh and Joseph. And I had never thought of that before, but it makes sense. It's just not exactly the same. So, for anybody who didn't get the chance to listen to the podcast, why doesn't Abraham want Isaac to go back to his homeland?
Because he didn't want him to get caught up in his dad's idol worship, because his dad made idols. And remember when Abraham was destroying them, so if he went back, he had the temptation of getting caught all back up into that mess because he got called by the real God, and he didn't want his son to fall into that trap.
And when he was talking to his servant, he made reference to the promise. So part of the reason was that he was relying on the promise and what God had told him, that he would have his descendants from Isaac and from his own people. So there's also the connection that no outside interference or any obligation to other families too. Because it comes from his own people, then he comes from his own ideas and from the same lineage. And we'll talk here a little bit about the connection and the necessary need for them to come from the same people group.
Think about Abraham also. Here God called him to go sacrifice his son, and then stops him and says, "I'm not like other gods." But Abraham grew up in that environment of like Molech, where it was normal for parents to go offer their kids as a sacrifice. And and God had just saved Isaac and was going to make him a great nation. So why would you want to send your son back to that same environment too?
Yeah, we also make the point in the podcast of the whole idea is to not settle and keep moving. And for Isaac to go back, that's going the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And he wants didn't really say why he didn't. We just make our speculations as to why he didn't. But
crazy thing to me though is he doesn't want him to go back to his homeland, but he wants someone from his homeland.
Yeah, which I wondered about.
And it's like you're anchoring back to it.
If you don't want him there, why are you going to bring? Why are there any girls around the neighborhood who are good enough? Why does he have to go back to get a girl?
Yeah,
I do wonder if there's something cultural in that where it's going to be somebody from his family, right? So there's some, I don't know. I just feel there's something in there that we're not, privy to.
Something we don't know.
Yeah, but I think a lot of just listening to this and I listened to the not all of it, but part of the chapters. I mean, all of the podcast part of the chapters today. I think it's amazing how Abraham is like, no, God told me to go here, I'm going to go here. Like Abraham was going to obey no matter what. God didn't say to go back. God told me to go. I'm going to go, and don't take my son back because I mean Abraham. It says he's very old, so he knows he's
getting close.
He's almost done.
Yeah.
And so I think he's like, no, if this is where God wants us, this is where we need to be, and not go back. And I just thought his obedience to God is like, even when I die, we're still going to obey. Man, Abraham's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Anything else before we move on? So Abraham says something that stood out to me this time that I hadn't ever thought of before. I don't know why. Maybe it's just you get used to reading it, you get that lullaby effect. But it says, Abraham says, he will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there. I had never thought about that line ever. And this time it stood out to me because I was.
How do you know that?
Yeah, I was going back and I was like, what are the problems? You know, like what stands out here? And it was like he's sending an angel before him. So he's like, this mission cannot fail.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter like what they say later about what the servant could be up to. You know, this mission is not going to fail because God is sending an angel before him. And I think Abraham was so confident in God having someone ready when he got there that telling his servant if he doesn't find somebody then he's free wasn't a big deal.
It's interesting that how the servant stayed committed to this commitment. That's why he had to make that oath under the thigh, because it's part of manhood to keep your word. So how he was able to keep to his word. I mean, how was Abraham to know if he didn't find anyone?
Yeah.
So it's a manly honor thing.
Well,
Yeah, he could have just gone off and.
It's one thing to, make a pact, an oath, be a man of your word. But to me, it's very strange that he would place his hand underneath his master's thigh. I mean, wouldn't his word be enough? I mean, why? And what's going on there with that? That's not something you see every day. Now that's our culture, so it was probably very significant in their culture. But to me, that's when they say, when you look at what's the problem with the scripture? To me, that's kind of a problem. Not that there's something wrong with it. It's just I don't get that.
It definitely hadn't been brought up before now, but I can't help but think about a simple thing that kids do all the time is pinky promise. And, it's such an innocent thing for a kid to do, but when you promise with your pinky, you're cutting it off if you don't keep that promise. So it's like you make that deal with your master, like I'm going to cut your
I don't want to cut my pinky
off,
but if I do, I could live without my pinky, my index or whatever, my thumb. No.
Well, I think it was more of that was a sign of, I swear by the covenant that God has given you. He was grabbing the covenant.
There's going to be some payment, though, if you don't keep your end of the bargain.
Yeah, that I will do what you've asked me to do. I'm standing by the covenant that God gave you, Abraham, and I'm going to go do this.
Right. Yeah, the grabbing of the thigh is a symbolic of the covenant.
Yeah, I was thinking more about his servant. I don't see his servant going all that way and not fulfilling it anyway, because he's spent so much time with Abraham. It's like you're invested your life into this other person's kingdom. You're not going to give up now.
You think he's probably spent every intimate moment with Abraham, as far as a friend, as close as a friend could be. Like, he's a caretaker. He's probably had to give Abraham baths and stuff and wash him, and so he has seen every part of Abraham that could possibly be. Anytime they have any discussions, they have it together, gets advice from him. I mean, it's as close a relationship as you possibly, very similar to what happened in Egypt with Joseph being there. It's being that type of person for that someone in power.
It wasn't the typical employee-employer.
So it was like because I love you, Abraham, this much that I am going to listen to your God because he made a covenant with you, and I am going to swear on that I will do what you asked me to do, and you take my life otherwise.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we also see, in verse 2, it says, Abraham said to his servant, the elder of his household, and who managed all that he owned. Place your hand under there's a thigh again. And, so this wasn't just any servant. This was an elder. This was a guy that Abraham trusted. This is a guy, you don't just trust the guy to manage everything you got to an average person. You pick the best. And this guy obviously was dedicated. And I'm glad you pointed out that, Abraham is saying that an angel is going to go before you. So you don't worry, this thing is going to be a success. But then later on, and I'm sorry, I may be jumping ahead, but later on, when he gets there he goes back to the land of Abraham's family and ancestors, and he's at this pool where all the beautiful women are going to come out and draw water, and then he prays, okay, God, this is it. This is it. Please give me success. Mm-hmm. And then he does a little, what's the term? I'm fleecing here, and he says, okay, may the woman who carries her jug and then offer me water and then offer the rest of my camels and everything water as well, and let her be the one, and so he's kind of, to me, it's interesting that he's doing that as well. And then what I love it is, it all happens. Mm-hmm. It all comes together.
Yeah, one thing that just stood out to me thinking about his chief servant. At one point in time, he had just given Lot up.
Right.
And he's like, is this guy going to be...
Is he going to be the one that's going to inherit everything?
And so, just thinking about what Ray said, would he have ever have known that? Or thought that, and then when it didn't come to pass, would he have gotten upset about it? You know what I mean? Like, would he, being a human, I could see myself being like, oh yeah, I'm going to get this, and then it's like taken away, and then it's like, well, you want to be happy, but at the same time you're like irritated because it's like not getting passed on to you.
Right.
Yeah. Like, here's your chance, and then you go on this mission, which could be your chance again. Mm-hmm. But I think you have to remember that this servant was, from what we understand, has been with Abraham through all this ordeal. So I think because the prayer he prays, that Abraham's faith influenced him. How did he know to call out unto God? And he refers to him as my master's God. So there's some knowledge or something he learned about this God to ask him. I'm sorry, we're not there yet, but it's. It's interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah, I just looked it up. He had to travel 500 miles to
Dang.
his wife. I was like, how far do you have to go? It's just 20 miles, but
on camel.
500 miles is far.
What if that's where that song comes from? I would walk 500 miles, and I would walk 500 more.
So was it a one-hump camel or a two-hump camel?
Just to be the man who finds the woman for your son.
How much gear was he
loaded with?
He
has to take a lot of stuff, but yeah.
Enough for 10 camels?
Yeah.
I do wonder kind of too because we just miss so much in the culture that we don't know that, like, was this guy, I don't think he necessarily probably just worked for Abraham. He would probably be considered part of Abraham's family. I would assume. I don't know. My assumption would be if he's this guy that is taking care of Abraham would trust him. It's almost like your uncle or something, like a something, some kind of relative. And I just wonder too, because he says he talks about how my master's God, but I wonder if is God his God, which I know we'll probably talk about a little bit later, but some of it is just this respect for Abraham.
Yeah.
That it's like, my master told me to come do this, and his God has been doing these things. It's just this ultimate respect for Abraham, who he is. I think that's so amazing.
He would have been there when Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. Mm-hmm. Like, he would have seen the destruction, so he knows that
could have been it. He told
God
me,
exists.
the angel's going to go ahead of you. Well, I definitely don't want
to
misstep here.
Yeah. So chapter 10, are you going to say anything?
No.
Or verse 10. Then the servant left, taking with him 10 of his master's camels loaded with all kinds of goodies. goods,
Goodies.
things from his master. He set out from Aram Naharaim, and made his way to the town of Nahor. He had the camels kneel down near the well outside the town. It was toward evening, the time the women go out to draw water. Then he prayed, Lord God of my master Abraham, make me successful today. Show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I'm standing beside the spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that, when I say to a young woman, please let down your jar, that I may have a drink, and she says, drink, and I'll water your camels too. Let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. And they go on to talk about how much, how many trips it would take to water all these camels. It could be 100 trips up and down a flight of stairs, or maybe a flight and a half of stairs up and down. And I was thinking about me being in a situation, if I was just like in the desert, or I saw somebody in the desert and I live here, and I'm like, yeah, I'll give you some water. But if you want water for your camels, you can go down there and get them. I don't have that hospitality at all. It just,
I'll help you down there.
yeah.
But to do all that, I thought it was interesting. For one, the prayer.
Mm-hmm.
First, the idea is that this is a prayer prayed out of fatigue, 500 miles. And then, do you think he just went through the village and said, "Hey, where the ladies at?" And then they said,
they were coming out.
There.
Yeah.
So he either saw them, or just happened to sit by this well because he was tired, and then he was like, "I don't want to go down there." So, development of this prayer. So in my mind, that's part of where it comes from. But also thinking about the situation. Okay, how would this scenario work? I mean, we're all thinking about scenarios, how they happen in our head. And so maybe this is also how he was thinking, this would be a good sign if they just so happen to come out, and the one who offers, not asks or complies, but the one who offers.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of interesting how that works. And then some of the things that stink out as a single guy, you got to think about the traits of someone you find. And then some of the things I find that she was refreshing. She refreshed him willingly, and then she was willing to do those how many trips it takes, and then the hospitality. I mean, you find people even in church, and then they're not at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Is also, yeah, that's a little bit further, but yeah.
Kind of reminded me of the first Cinderella story. Like going to go find the wife of the prince, and if the shoe fits, but I'm going to lay down. It's got to be this specific way. It's almost like he was trying to get out of it. But because if you don't find a wife, but he was going to lay it down and make it tough, and he wanted also to know, if this is going to happen, it's going to be tough, and it's not just going to be anybody. And they've got to have some of that chutzpah in the family line, and so I could see him laying down and making it tough. But it does sound like the first Cinderella story, though.
Yeah. What I was thinking about when you were talking about was he looking through the town or whatever, and they said it was the time when the women came out to get the water. I was thinking about the Jungle Book. When Mowgli, that's the first time he sees a girl from the village is when they're coming out to get water. So, I mean, obviously this is some kind of a...
This is where you meet them.
Even 500 miles away, it's the same type of
Yeah.
custom that the women are going out at this time of day to get water. In verse 15, before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The woman was very beautiful, a virgin, no man had slept with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, "Please give me a little water from your jar." "Drink, my lord," she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, "I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all of his camels. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring weighing a beka, and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. Then he asked, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She answered him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, born to Nahor." She added, "We have plenty of straw and fodder, as well as room for you to spend the night." Then the man bowed down and worshipped the Lord, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives." So it's so, I mean, it doesn't say there were any other women that were involved in this situation before Rebecca, but it's just amazing that it was her.
Yeah.
That it was
Just so happened to be
Abraham's
the relative.
brother's,
Yeah.
wife's son's daughter, and it's like, you can't get, an angel of the Lord went before them. You can't get
It's not a coincidence.
any more
Sure.
perfect than that.
I just wish God would answer my prayers that fast.
Mm.
Before I finished, hey, there she is.
We get to 500
Well,
Yeah.
while he was still
Right.
speaking, I love that. I just
Yeah.
looked up, those 2 words appear, depending on the version, and in the CSB version, it appears 20 times.
What word?
Well, as combination words, still speaking, while you were still
Gotcha.
speaking, and a lot of dramatic things happen right after. So it was like, while he was still speaking, whoop, this happened.
That's like in Job,
And-
isn't it?
Yes, in Job. Yeah. Well, and that's a pretty bad example
Yeah.
where the servants were, while one was still speaking,
Yeah.
the other one came.
Only think about the bad ones.
You lost all your camels.
Happened to Daniel too.
And but also too, it goes from all over the Old Testament into the New Testament. Where Jesus, while he was still speaking, a cloud came down.
Mm.
While he was still speaking, Judas showed up with the temple guards. So I love the drama of God sometimes. While he was still speaking, the one woman
Mhm.
that he traveled 500 miles just happens to walk up, and and to me it's just amazing.
It's also interesting is the idea of rest.
Yeah.
Then we begin this whole study with the idea of rest. So the servant rested. He didn't go. He went searching, but not the idea we think about searching. He went to where he was supposed to be, and he rested there.
Mhm.
Then she came. When I think about when God brought Eve to Adam, he was where he was supposed to be,
Yeah.
resting. So to me, I'm developing this connection between rest, being where you're supposed to be, and resting. As a single person in the quote dating world, there's this idea you're supposed to go out and look in all these corners. When Scripture doesn't teach us that, Scripture tells me to be where I'm supposed to be and rest, and then she'll
Pray for
come.
her to come give you water.
And give her specific that she will be refreshing.
And water your camels. You
Yeah.
better
That
get
she'll
some
be
camels.
refreshing, because I've known a lot of girls that not refreshing at all. And again, about the work, and she was willing to put into work to do some things to help somebody out of her own, and then the being hospitable. And I think that's the reason why Abraham wanted the servant to go to his people. This idea of hospitality, because I think the reason why Abraham was hospitality was just part of how he was brought up. So if he got the girl from his people, then she'll already have this
Same type of
characteristic
hospitality.
and she was raised the same way. So that's why later on the New Testament tells us to not be unequally yoked.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the situation. We'll have the same background, same ideas and understandings, and so
Yeah, I was thinking it's a part of his prayer being so specific, wanting to water his camels. That would be a real good example of the same type of hospitality that Abraham had. Cooking all the bread for the visitors. It's like it was an insane amount of bread to just make some dudes who were coming out of nowhere and then leaving. So I think he's, even his servant would recognize that, and he was watching her closely. That had never stood out to me either. Like he's watching her closely to see if she finishes all of it, or if she brings all the water for the camels, or if they get enough, or when she decides they have enough. It's like,
what's her attitude through the whole process?
But
Well,
I think it's interesting in verse 17 that, he just didn't say, okay, God, make it all happen. Verse 17, it says that the servant ran to meet her and said, so he saw an opportunity. He's there, like you were saying, Stephen, he prayed specifically for these things. But he just didn't sit there. He was looking. And then an opportunity, oh, wait a minute, here comes somebody. And then, okay, I'm going to run to her, I don't know what would happen if, I'm in a supermarket somewhere and I see somebody that I've been praying for. And I see myself running up to meet her. Get away.
Yeah, as tall as you are, too.
Call security. Get him away from me. Anyway, but
this day and age, that's a crime.
it is.
Try that,
don't do that.
How it goes.
Yeah, anxiety attack. One thing I thought was interesting that I like to look up, people's names because they always have a meaning. But Rebecca's name means to bind.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I was just like,
Wow.
at first I was like, why was her name mean to bind? And then I was like, the binding of Isaac. I was like, oh my gosh, like, even in marriage, he's it's binding. He's gonna be bound to this woman. Right. And I was thinking, also, like, if he's out there waiting for a woman to come by, the other ones come by and he's like, they don't really look like Abraham. He's like looking at him. She doesn't have the same characteristics. Yeah. I wonder if that's why he ran up to her, if she was just the first woman that came out. And he was just like, you know what? That angel came before me, and he's got it ready, and whoever comes out is going to be the one.
I'm going to go up to her, and she either is or she isn't, and she will or she won't, and she did.
Yeah, she will or she won't. Well, chapter 25 was the death of Abraham. They didn't really go into that. And they didn't finish out the chapter because they said they would come back to it later in the New Testament, I believe. But Genesis chapter 26. Now there's a famine in the land, besides the previous famine in Abraham's time, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and will give them all these lands, and through your offspring all nations of the earth will be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed me, and did everything I required of him, keeping my commands, my decrees, and my instructions. So Isaac stayed in Gerar. When the men of that place asked him about his wife, he said, she is my sister, because he was afraid to say, she is my wife. He thought the men of this place might kill me on account of Rebekah, because she is beautiful. When Isaac had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked down from a window and saw Isaac caressing his wife Rebekah. So Abimelech summoned Isaac and said, she is really your wife. Why did you say she is my sister? Isaac answered him, because I thought I might lose my life on account of her. Then Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the men might have slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech gave orders to all the people, anyone who harms this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. And they were saying that this probably wasn't the same Abimelech. I wanted to believe it was, but I found a midrash that it was his son, and his son's name was so his Abimelech. His son's name was Ben Melech. It's like Ben is
his son.
Yeah. So Abimelech is what does it mean? It's my father is a king, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my father the king. And so when he became the king after his father died, they named him Abimelech also. And I kept thinking how Isaac would have done this and how Abimelech's son would have done this. Like, this is now a generational thing happened between two sons. And I was thinking, that's something you wouldn't ask your parents, but those times when you're with your family and you tell stories, they were talking about campfire stories maybe. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, I know that's the way I found out certain things about my family is when we're not doing anything, we got nothing to do, we're not watching TV, and we just start talking. You know, and Sarah, or one of the servants, is like, "Hi, you remember that time we went to Egypt, and you almost lost Sarah?" You know, probably goading Abraham, and Isaac's like, "What? What happened?" And then the same for Abimelech. But I was thinking, so why a death sentence for anyone who did anything? Because it seems so extreme. But in chapter 20, when Abraham did the same thing to the man of the same name, God came to that man and said, "Behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife."
Wow.
So that fear, like the fear of God, was put into his dad and transferred to his son. You know,
he remembered.
Yeah. So it was transferred down, and it was very effective. So whatever Abimelech told his son must have stuck.
Wow.
I do wonder. I was thinking about it because it skips right over the chapter with Esau. Thinking about dude from what do you call him, Hobbs. But it passes over the story, right, about these guys, Esau and Jacob. And I was thinking, how old would Rebecca have been at this point? Because she was old enough to have been taking care of the camels. Then she comes to get married, and then the boys are born, and they're old enough to be out hunting and whatever. So she's not like 20 years old. I don't think she's. Who knows how old she is?
She's 40.
Yeah, maybe she's 40.
Sarah
But I
was
thought Sarah wasn't very young either. Like, how do these women have to be so beautiful in their older age for that to be an issue? That's crazy, right? I mean, it has nothing to do with anything, but I'm just like, that's amazing.
Yeah. Something that interests me when I hear all that is there was a high regard for marriage and purity in a pagan world, which is completely opposite of where we're at today.
Yeah.
But that was interesting that that they had a high regard for marriage and that relationship. Now, Isaac thought, if you know she's married to me, you'll kill me. So they didn't have a high regard for killing people.
Yeah,
right.
But they did have a high regard for marriage, and I thought that's pretty interesting. That's something that we lost.
Definitely.
That's true, because after they found out it was his wife, they didn't kill him and take her. They said, hands off.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's a good point.
But it does show that we have a sinful nature, and if you want to know what your sins are like, look at your family.
Definitely your kids.
Look at your parents, your grandparents, and even the things that you deal with. It dawned on me that a lot of the struggles and things I've gone through, I'm sure my dad went through too. Because we have there are some things that don't tempt me, and there are some things that do. And for other people, it would be maybe something completely different. So I do think there's generational sin, because you go through the Bible and you see it over and over again. And it's easy to get that, talking about all that, that he did bad, and then he did bad, and then he did bad, and my great-grandpa, he did something, and here I am, still fighting the same thing. But the other side of that is there's also generational good. And we don't necessarily recognize that as much. But I think that's important to have that chutzpah, is that the word? that character, and so maybe there are generational sins that we have to deal with, but we can break that chain, and we can start generational goodness. I look back in my history, and there was violence and anger and brutality, child abuse, spousal abuse, but that ended with me. it ended. My grandfather was a mean man, and my mom had to live with the scars of growing up with a mean dad.
Wow.
And although she tried to be different, she still had issues with that. And my early years of having kids, I was I was mean, but now that I can look and I see how my sons are with their children, they're not mean.
It's broken.
There's a chain that has been broken.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I think that we need to relish that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I was afraid, and I'm sure as a dad you'd be afraid that your kids will grow up just like you.
Mm-hmm.
And they will. But they'll also grow like you in your faith.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know my sons will have the same impure struggles I've had. But it can also have the drive for purity too.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like when I read this, when I saw this whole section, it taught me God's providence.
Mm-hmm.
And because you may talk about this, but Abraham and Isaac, Abraham went this way and Isaac went that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they both told the same story, coming from different ends.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Abraham went to Egypt. Isaac didn't go to Egypt, but God's blessed them both.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't say God didn't tell Isaac or Abraham not to go to Egypt.
Right.
Where it does say that God told Isaac not to go to Egypt. But whatever it is, you know, God's providence.
Yeah.
Guy travels 500 miles, sits down at a well, and there's Rebecca.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what are the odds?
Yeah.
And all over again, you can go on and on and on about, well, what were the odds of that happening? What were the odds of that happening? And I think we need to be more aware of God's providence.
Mm.
Absolutely.
So,
I could definitely see it in my own life
yeah.
when I look back and see how I should be dead. I should be in jail. You know, it's like
Yeah.
I can look back and be like, okay, he was protecting my life for something.
Mhm.
You know, so what am I supposed to be moving toward to fulfill that end of him keeping me alive?
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, you know, Mark hit on something, and I love Mark's sayings. Like one of my favorites is, "Well, what's the point?" You know, and you were touching on it, Mark. There, and I just remember from previous podcasts. I think it was back in Genesis 15, where toward the end of the podcast, you know, they were bringing it all together. You know, it says, "Here we are." You know, here we are in the story. Where, you know, this was 2000 BC, and here we are 2000 AD. So we're 4,000 years into the story. What should we have learned? You know, like where have we? How have we grown in those 4,000 years?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, and I got to thinking, wow, I've been a disciple, you know, since '91, and I had to do the math. And where am I now? Am I, you know, why am I struggling with things? Shouldn't I be further along by now? Shouldn't we, as a nation, you know, human beings, where should we be with God? You know, because God doesn't stand for anything that's bad. I mean, you look at all the things that God loves. He loves justice. You know, He loves mercy, freedom, righteousness, love.
Mm-hmm.
None of these things are bad. And you know, and also like too, where he talked about sometimes God was silent with Abraham because he was challenging him. And you know, how's this, you said you're going to bless me. This is before Isaac happened, and he's angry with God. You know, I've separated myself from my nephew Lot. You know, I thought that all your promises were going to be fulfilled through him. Now he's gone for the second time. Now it's my servant here. So without a descendant, he's going to inherit everything. And then God was kind of silent. But then later on, there's a new conversation. But God has not given him all the details. because, if he gives, I know for me, this to be true, if you give me enough details, I'm going to come to my own conclusion. I know what this is going to be, and I'm going to mess it up.
Yeah.
It's just going to be bad. And that's kind of what they did, because, Abraham and Sarah had figured out, hey, all these descendants are going to come from us. Well, maybe not from me, but maybe my servant, and then comes Ishmael, and that was a whole different mess. So if God gives us too much, we're just going to mess it up.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think of the scripture in John where someone once wrote that we took all the Gospels, all the things about Jesus, everything he did, we add them all up, and it was something like maybe 30 days of his life. Why not more? Why don't we know Jesus' favorite color? Why don't we know his favorite food? Why don't we know what kind of sandals he wore? Well, then we'll miss the point. I'll just focus on his favorite color, and I'm going to wear Jesus' favorite sandals. So rather than doing the outward stuff, but not really focusing on the more important things.
Yeah. Very true.
That he did, and I just that really just stuck with me.
Yeah, we'd probably become more Pharisaic with if we knew those things.
And
Yeah.
And lastly, Abraham, he was about moving, going places. Where in other previous podcasts, bad things happened when they stayed in one place, the Tower of Babel, and they built this tower to honor themselves. Where Abraham was moving around, and when he did settle somewhere, we go, he's going to settle down. He was supposed to stay moving. Something bad's going to happen, but he didn't, because he built an altar, not to himself, but to God, and he worshipped God, and good things happened. And I got to thinking about, okay, what about my life? Am I building altars to God? What does that look like? Does that maybe I step out on faith? I pray and then expect it to happen, and then step out on that, and and let God do it.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna think about that more.
Yeah.
Good thoughts.
Good stuff.
Anything, Roddy? Saw you writing stuff
Oh
down
no, I was
over
just
there.
thinking Jesus wore Jesus sandals.
He did.
So verse 12, Isaac planted crops
Yeah.
in the land that same year, reaped 100-fold because the Lord blessed him.
Yes.
The man became rich, and his wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. And I thought, could Abraham have had the same result if he hadn't gone to Egypt, if he had stayed out and tried to tough it out and rely on God more?
Wow.
Let's
Good
keep
question.
moving. He had so many flocks and herds and servants that the Philistines envied him. So all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines stopped up, filling them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Move away from us. You have become too powerful for us." So Isaac moved away from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar, where he settled. Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham died, and he gave them the same names his father had given them. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and discovered a well of fresh water there. But the herders of Gerar quarreled with those of Isaac and said, "The water is ours." So he named the well Esek, because they disputed with him. Then they dug another well, but they quarreled over that one also. So he named it Sitnah. He moved on from there and dug another well, and no one quarreled over it. He named it Rehoboth, saying, "Now the Lord has given us room, and we will flourish in the land." From there he went up to Beersheba. That night the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and will increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." There Isaac built an altar and called on the name of the Lord. There he pitched his tent, and there his servants dug a well. Meanwhile, Abimelech had come to him from Gerar, and Huzuth, his personal advisor from Pico, Pico de Gallo, the commander of his forces. Isaac asked them, "Why have you come to me, since you were hostile to me and sent me away?" They answered, "We saw clearly that the Lord was with you, and we said, there ought to be a sworn agreement between us and you. Let us make a treaty with you, that you will do us no harm, just as we did not harm you, but always treated you well and sent you away peacefully. Now you are blessed by the Lord." And they were kind of commenting that these people were already seeing the blessing, the secondhand blessing from Abraham's son Isaac.
Wow.
And I couldn't help but think, am I digging wells for anyone?
Wow.
You know, am I willing to let go of something that I'm working for so that someone else can reap the benefits? I just feel so challenged by this well issue. But then I think back to the beginning when he's at the well waiting for a woman to come and water his camels, and it's like there's so much back and forth going on here between wells and Abraham's wells, and now they're Isaac's wells, and finding Isaac's wife at the well. And I looked up a chiasm for chapter 26, and it starts in 26, 1 through 6. Isaac goes to Abimelech and has God's blessing. And then in verse 23 and 30 through 33, Isaac goes up to Beersheba and has God's blessing. And then verse 7 through 11, the Philistines contend with Isaac over his wife. And then verse 20 to 22, Philistines contend with Isaac over the wells. And then in 12 through 14, Isaac receives 100-fold during a year of famine. And in 26:19, Isaac found living water in the place of a famine.
Wow.
And then 26:16, Philistines fill up the wells Abraham dug. 26:18, Isaac digs the wells back up. 26:16, Abimelech tells Isaac to go from us, and then Isaac departs from them. And then in the middle is the center of the chiasm, which is, "For you are mightier than we are." And all I can think is God is the main character, and he's the one that's mightier than we are.
Yes.
That's cool.
Any thoughts before we move on from that?
That is pretty cool.
There's
Well,
a lot
I thought
of
about
info.
how it almost sounds exactly what Abraham went through, where they make a well and then they get in an argument and they'd move on, build another well and move on. And finally, then, I guess he was the king, came out.
Abimelech.
Yeah, came out to Abraham and made a treaty. And I told you about the tree that he planted was a tree of hospitality, the tamarisk tree. And so Abraham planted this tree, which was not native to there, but provided plenty of shade, provided water, provided salt, and provided shade. And then he could teach about God around this tree, whoever came. And so here again, they're fighting over wells, and because they do it God's way, God's name is glorified even to people who didn't believe and now believe that this God is the one and only God.
I think.
So,
Yeah. I was going to say, I think part of it is this is what happens when you learn to trust the story. God says, "I'm going to prosper you," so it's not a big deal for you to take this well. I'm prosperous no matter what you do.
Good point. Yeah.
A person cannot affect God's
blessings.
God blessing or taking care of them.
Yeah.
So it kind of gives me back to that idea of in the New Testament, greater is He that is in me. With
He's
that,
in the world.
with that revelation, a true taking on that revelation, is it really a risk to obey God? Makes it kind of takes the risk out of the risk. If that makes sense, sometimes you feel you're trusting God to make a move, but there's risk. But if greater is He that is in me, then am I really taking a risk?
You're not really gambling.
It's not really gambling on a sure thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's that's learning to trust the story, knowing when we get this idea that God is for us, God's not trying to do something bad to us or take things away or manipulate us for His own entertainment. To trust that He loves us enough that He's going to take care of everything. When it looks like when 2020 happens in your life,
Oh, don't let it stop.
We can trust the story that God's going to take care of us. He's going to protect us, look over us,
Right.
because that's who He is, and we belong to Him.
Yeah.
For 2020 to happen bad to us would that not be a strike against His character? That He doesn't take care of us, He doesn't provide, and God's not going to allow His character to be tarnished like that. So when we learn to trust that story, we're trusting God's character to do what He says He was going to do for us.
This is the year of James, chapter 1.
Yeah.
Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of many kinds.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like they went with Shalom, both Abraham and Isaac, instead of going with empire, which, hey, this is mine and I'm going to kill you if you try to take it, which is what normally most kings would have done. But they knew these people, they had relationships with these people, they cared about these people, and they were kind even when they were being treated bad. And the kindness kind of bit them in the butt, and they came around and went, hey, we kind of like your God.
Yeah.
He's been nice to you even when we're not, and they realized it.
Yeah, I was reading a midrash about Abimelech and his son, and it said when the first Abimelech that Abraham dealt with passed away, Abraham traveled to their country to mourn with his people. So they had a pretty tight relationship anyway, and so they must have known each other. But I was looking up, I think Mark had kind of touched on it when he was, and you also touched on it, Ray, when he was Isaac is kind of going backwards, and they were talking about how he's going backwards and kind of fixing what Abraham had advanced on, and I don't want to say messed up, but it's like God's retribution, like He's coming back and kind of settling these issues. And I just looked up the similarities between Isaac and Abraham, and Isaac travels to Gerar, the land of the Philistines, when famine strikes, and it's the same area Abraham and Sarah journeyed after Sodom's destruction. And due to famine, Isaac plans on traveling to the same place Abraham went, Egypt. The Lord appears to Isaac, telling him not to go to Egypt, and uses the same covenant language that He used with Abraham. And in fear of losing his life, Isaac lies about Rebekah's identity, just as Abraham withheld the truth of Sarah's full identity. The Abimelech in verse 8, however, is most likely the son or grandson of the Abimelech that ruled Gerar in Abraham's day. As Abraham and Isaac's prosperity grew, both needed more space and water for their flocks. Abraham sought peace when disputes broke out between Lot's herdsmen and his herdsmen. Likewise, Isaac avoids escalating conflicts with Gerar's contentious herdsmen. Plug the first two wells he and his men dug. So just in reading that, I can't help but think, like, blessed are the peacemakers. It's like, no matter what's going on, the person who's striving for peace is always going to be the one who stands out of the crowd. We have all these people rioting and tearing things up, but who's the peacemaker in all of it? Who's standing up and saying, like,
good point.
Can we love each other rather than head for destruction? And I read something from a layman's Bible commentary. The names of the wells in verse 20 through 22 reflect the situations. Isaac means argument in Hebrew, a reminder of the conflict its discovery created. Sitna comes from a Hebrew verbal root meaning to oppose, to be an adversary,
or conflict,
and signals that the digging of this well causes opposition from the Philistines. And Rehoboth comes from a verbal root meaning to make room, and reminds all how God has made room for them. Since He finally has a well that is uncontested, Isaac might logically have decided to stay there. Instead, he moves on to Beersheba. So that kind of wraps up this, and then the next two will be our last for this year, and the next two are Grappling with God, part 1 and 2. So kind of already know where that's headed.
That sounds like it's going to be a lot.
Yeah. Part 1 and 2, but I can't say I didn't enjoy this episode. It just, I didn't feel like it was like earth shattering, but it was
it's
good
there
info.
It's there for a reason.
Yeah.
And we need it.
Makes me wonder how much more are we not. What am I not getting out of this? What am I missing? There's got to be more.
It's a little frustrating because there's so much they don't talk about at all.
Yeah.
But the good thing I think is it kind of can make you go, well, I'm gonna go.
Let me do it.
Because in some of this stuff you're learning how to I don't know, think differently or how to So I think it's kind of cool to be able to go back to some of that stuff and look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And even trying to figure out some of the cultural stuff. I'm reading this book called Sitting at the Feet of Rabbi Jesus.
Wow.
And there's little things that it's just silly. It's almost like if we just knew those things in the culture, it means something not different, but it means more.
Mm-hmm.
Like with Mary and Martha and how
Right,
Jesus.
More weight to it.
Yeah, how Mary and Martha and Jesus came, and Martha was doing all the stuff, but Mary was just sitting at his feet listening. Sitting at his feet would have been something that a disciple did. She wasn't just blowing off whatever. She was sitting with the rabbi and listening to what he was teaching. And so there's a little bit of a cultural thing, and that was just one small thing. There's a lot more stuff in there, but that's what I think with a lot of these things. Like, to me, this is what is encouraging, is that just learning the cultural stuff, it means it doesn't change necessarily what we think about stuff, but it definitely gives us a lot more insight into it. It made me think about there's a scripture, one of the scriptures that you read, that the Lord multiplied his
100 times.
his cattle or his camels or his whatever, and then made me think about the Lord added to their number daily those who are being saved.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and just how God did that. And then made me start thinking, well, because they had committed themselves to apostle teaching, fellowship, breaking of bread, and prayer. Is there something back, like, what's back there?
The question is, can we trust the story
Yes.
Right.
without trying to do it ourselves?
Yeah.
Good point.
Without trying to find that niche or that side thing or whatever.
Right.
Can we trust the story enough that if we are devoted to God, if we are grafted, we are connected to the vine, we will bear much fruit.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we don't trust the story.
Right.
Yeah.
Which means we don't need programs on it. We just need to listen and
Our programs need to connect us to the vine.
yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Fruit comes from being connected, not
Mhm.
from
Healthy
not from
tree,
being
baby.
the bushes.
Tree.
One of the things that stuck out to me was from there he went up to Beersheba, wherever you pronounce it, Beersheba, and then it means the name itself, the Well of Seven, or Well of Oath, and because that's where Abraham received an oath from God, was that same place, and then also that's where Isaac went back to the same place. And so it was the well of an oath. And I always think about how many times Jesus was always talking about he was the water, he's the well, he's, and so this is the well of welling up with hospitality, willing to give up and trust the story and not give into the temptation of our kind of our beastly nature. And you always think of the well, something that ever says seven in Hebrew, that means completeness,
Yes.
or like a place of peace, and so definitely that's where Abraham was at a lot, was Beersheba, and then Isaac goes back. So I don't know, just something that stuck out to me. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good stuff.
I was thinking before we close out what Roddy was talking about, kind of going through and reading stuff and learning how to dig. I was thinking about, like, you give a man your fish, you feed him for a day, you teach him to fish, you feed him for the rest of his life, and it's like if we just give people little tidbits, then that's all you're giving them. But if you teach them to dig, then they get so much more out of it. It enhances everything that we learn.
And I like to
knowing
dig.
all this stuff. Yeah, literally like to dig.
I literally like to dig. I like to play in the dirt.
Join us next week as we discuss Grappling with God Part 1.
Don't forget to like and share.
Like and share.
Like and share.
Like a chair.
Like a chair.
Like a chair.